Today's episode is brought to you by Surfshark. If it feels like the internet is getting more dangerous by the second, and feel that hackers have more ways to target you, trackers are following your every move, and malware is hiding all over the web, luckily there is a solution. You can get a VPN. Essentially, it will hide your location and make you more difficult to identify and target. But privacy and security are not all that Surfshark has to offer. If you have a VPN, you will forget all about those pesky geo restrictions. Everything from news sources to social media apps that have become unavailable to you because of your location. All you need to do is change your virtual location and access all the entertainment you want safely and securely. And the best part is you can try out Surfshark completely risk-free because they have a 30-day money-back guarantee. So get Surfshark VPN at surfshark.deals/TTD. And don't forget, enter promo code TTD for 83% off and 3 months free. But now, on with today's show. Now, when I record this podcast, typically I hop on a call for 30 minutes with someone and try and get the most out of that guest and about their backstory and what motivates them and the journey that they've been on. And every single guest is completely unique. Some are a little cautious and guarded to begin with and a bit worried about maybe staying on brand, and some are just nervous and some just love to talk. But by the end of each show, for the most part, I think we get a great idea of who someone is, how they got here and what they stand for. But sometimes I strike gold, and despite knowing someone for 35 seconds, we just seem to click and bounce off each other naturally, and today's guest is one of those guys. His name is Peter Berg, VP of Business Development and Strategy at a company called Very Good Security, and he's also the former head of Visa Ventures. And he has a great backstory and is a fintech expert who is going to join us today and talk about the major industry trends like the rise of virtual cards and embedded fintech, and also talk about why data security is such a crucial pillar for payments and e-commerce companies as consumers increasingly become concerned about using their personal info. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to San Francisco, where Peter Berg is waiting to join us in conversation. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thank you, Neil. Pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for having me. I'm Peter Berg. I'm the VP of Business Development and Strategy at Very Good Security, and I've been operating in payments and fintech for now, I guess, well over a decade. I also advise and invest in early stage companies, and I've been at Very Good Security, or VGS, as we say, for the last 4 years. Have been involved in a lot of our key growth initiatives. I also lead our strategic accounts, which includes relationships with like the major payment networks and other key partners. And then before that, I built and led Visa Ventures, which is the corporate venture arm of the global payments network Visa. And I've had the pleasure of spending time in both startups and large enterprises, and I can appreciate them both for different reasons.
And before we learn more about your success, I always like to learn a little bit more about my guests and how they got where they are today. So assuming you are not Peter Berg, the American actor and movie director, can I ask that you share your origin story, where your passion for tech came from and finance, and how those worlds collided for you and what put you on this path you're on right now?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm a busy man. I moonlight as you pointed out, as a actor director, and then my day job is fintech, so quite busy. Happy to. I come from a family of teachers, actually, and I'm the only one in my entire family who bucked the trend of not becoming a teacher. But that upbringing kind of taught me to really value sort of curiosity, learning, and also teaching, and in particular, taking complicated concepts and kind of breaking them down, making them approachable, explaining them to others. And I also learned to see the interconnectedness of like pretty much everything, which is both a blessing and a curse, mind you. Yeah. But early on, I don't worry, I won't go through my whole life history, but early on in elementary school, we had to do this project where we had to like choose a future profession and come up with like a business plan and marketing material or whatever the fifth grade equivalent of that is. And I distinctly remember having trouble choosing just one profession. So I made up my own and I called it problem solver. And I even had like a little business card with like a light bulb on it. I decided that I would just solve problems for people, whatever they had. And it's kind of funny because that's pretty much what I do now. I basically solve problems for fun and profit. Right. And I think that's actually, tying it back into technology. Technology, in my view, is like progressive, and it kind of helps us move forward. It helps us solve problems. It also requires problem solving to sort of develop these new technologies. And, sure, there are ways to abuse and misuse tech, as with anything. But on the whole, I think it's really about making improvements in life. And so, I like solving problems. I also really enjoyed science and math. At one point, I thought I'd be a math or physics major, and then I realized those folks are like on a totally different level than me. I was not one of them. I'm in awe of them, but I cannot hang with the theoretical mathematicians. But I liked using math to solve problems, and that's essentially what like statistics and applied mathematics is. So that's what I studied at universities, mathematical and computational science. Then I got a degree in statistics, and before it was branded cool as like data science and machine learning. Basically, your only jobs were like traditional statistician or actuary, which is what I ended up doing. I became an actuary. But fortunately, I landed at a really forward-thinking firm that really leaned into technology and wasn't just stuck in kind of the ancient actuarial sciences. And so I volunteered for a new project that ended up becoming the very first online SaaS platform for tax optimized like pension plan design. And so we took what was like a multiple month long process and literally shrunk it to hours. That was acquired by JP Morgan Chase. And after that, I was kind of like off to the races. I ended up spending time in a few different startups, one in consumer packaged goods, Joby, makers of a thing called the GorillaPod. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's a flexible tripod. Built a camera app that shot to #1 in the App Store and helped them launch new product lines, went to Europe and opened up their market there. And then a few years later, after I was building another SaaS company, I accidentally talked my way into a job over a dinner party with some Visa executives. I basically gave them my unvarnished opinions on their latest acquisition, and they were intrigued. And before I knew it, I was working in emerging payment products at Visa. And my friends thought I was crazy because here I am in Silicon Valley. I actually turned down a role at Uber. That's a story for another time. And I went to Visa, and they're like, "What are you doing? Visa is a dinosaur." But I think that's kind of like a running theme through everything that I've done is like wherever I am and wherever you are in life, I think there were ways to innovate and push things forward and find new approaches to things. And so I got to do some really, really cool stuff at Visa. I managed the relationship with Square, for example, post-investment. Visa didn't really know what to do with them at the time. They just invested in the company. We're trying to make sense of them. They were breaking rules and trying to push the envelope. But Visa leaned into that and made that relationship productive and actually collaborated, I would argue, for the benefit of the industry as well as for Square and Visa. And eventually Visa realized they could be a lot more engaged with the tech companies in our own backyard, Apple, Google, Facebook. We didn't really have relationships with them at the time, but the group I was in developed the frameworks essentially that led to network tokens and Apple Pay, Google Pay, et cetera. And Visa also realized they needed a strategy for kind of leaning into innovation that was happening on the up and comers, innovating at the edge. And that's when I raised my hand. I said, I come from this world. And we ended up putting together Visa Ventures, which is their in-house venture arm. And in that role, I made the first investment in a crypto company of any of the payment networks. We also invested in companies like Stripe and Marqeta, and one that was LoopPay, which ended up becoming the core of what is Samsung Pay. And that's actually how I also met VGS. That's how I met Mahmood at Very Good Security. I loved the idea. I wanted to invest in their Series A, and I just saw the problem he was set out to solve. And eventually I had the itch to build again and not just invest. And that's how I landed here.
Wow, what an incredibly cool story. So much to unpack there. I especially love early on where you're armed with just a business card saying problem solver in there. Did you inspire
Some days I feel like that's all I have today.
Did you inspire the Equalizer or the A-Team or something? It sounds like this mysterious figure in the shadows just listening out for those problems.
I think my powers were probably somewhat limited as a fifth grader, but I'd like to think I've developed a little bit more of a skill set since then.
But as well as former head of Visa Ventures, I'm curious, what is your take on the rise of virtual cards and embedded fintech? Because so much is happening in that space, isn't it?
You're absolutely right, Neil. So much is happening, and a lot has happened over the time that I've been involved in fintech. One of my favorite quotes is from Jim Barksdale, the former CEO of Netscape, the browser, and he says that there's only two ways I know of to make money: bundling and unbundling. And I just love that because it's true. It's perfect because, it feels like half the people are adding features and half the people are like taking away features. So it's the only way, that they know to make money. And two, it speaks directly to what we're seeing, I think, in the market right now. Companies are looking to embed fintech natively into a lot of existing products or services or workflows. And historically, that's been very difficult, actually. It's, fintech is complicated. It's highly regulated. There's a lot at stake if you get it wrong. And for a long time, there wasn't great infrastructure. Before you could build anything cool, you actually had to build the plumbing first, which was super painful. And that's improved significantly, I would say, in the last 10 years or so. We still have room to go, of course. But it's opened up new opportunities like you alluded to. So, the rise of payment facilitation, for example, these are essentially software businesses, right? Many of whom own a vertical, like software to run everything about a salon or like an auto body shop. And they realize that they can capture more value and make their core offering or their platform even stickier by embedding payments or some fintech offering into their platform. So instead of having your payments experience decoupled from the main platform or user experience, you actually combine the two. And then you end up with things like, instead of having a separate payment flow for a ride sharing app, you end up with Uber, where you just get in and you get out and payment just magically happens, right? Well, there's a lot of really complicated plumbing that happens behind the scenes that no one sees, but it's just an elegant experience. So that's one example of what we mean by embedding fintech. And then with virtual cards, we're seeing the same thing happen, card issuance broadly, but especially topical for the last, couple of years with the pandemic and whatnot. It's really accelerated this trend. Everyone wants to be top of wallet, essentially. They want to be your preferred card in your wallet for spending. But the time between when a consumer signs up for a new card and when they actually receive that card can be days. Many days can go by, sometimes even weeks. Not to mention there's a bunch of costs involved for the issuer: postage costs, card printing, rush shipping in some cases, and that starts to really add up at scale. But if you can put a card in the hands of a consumer instantly after they've been approved, it's a much better experience for the consumer, better for the issuer overall. It's also been accelerated, like I said, by the pandemic, and we've had literal chip shortages where you cannot manufacture cards fast enough, or delays in shipping. And then, of course, the tailwind to online commerce. Virtual cards are the fastest way to get a card out there. And so we have a number of customers that are doing exactly this. And consumers have also come to expect more from their issuers and their banks, frankly. They want this elegant, mobile first, digital native experience, as they should. And virtual cards are a great way to help enable that.
I love that. And that brings us bang up to date now. And obviously you're with Very Good Security now, or VGS for short. And for people that are tuning in and maybe hearing about VGS for the very first time, can you just tell the listeners a little bit more about what it is and the kind of problems that you're solving with tech?
VGS is basically magic, only it's real. I'm kidding, but only a little bit. VGS essentially helps companies maximize the value of their sensitive data, in particular financial data, while reducing or eliminating their risk and compliance burden. That's a mouthful, but what that means is, imagine issuing a payment card without ever seeing a card number, or doing a background check or an identity verification without ever seeing someone's government ID or personal information, or underwriting a loan without ever needing access to their bank account number or PII. You could even accept payments across multiple processors around the globe without ever needing to build and maintain a PCI environment yourself. And so we essentially do for data what banks do for money. One, we keep it safe. That's, of course, table stakes. It's foundational. Nothing else works if you don't do that. Two, we help you transact or exchange it. And three, we help you increase the value of it, i.e., compound the value of your deposit with VGS. So, the core of it comes down to one question. Why is it the businesses have to handle sensitive data in the first place, right? Most people just sort of take this for granted that they have to deal with this problem. Turns out it's really actually just an input into a business outcome, right? That outcome is probably issuing a card or underwriting a loan or optimizing your payment stack or embedding fintech, right? That's your destination. The problem is you've got some sensitive inputs, i.e. data, that are regulated, that are necessary to achieve that outcome. But we ask the question, what if you could get to that very same outcome without having to actually handle all that data and deal with the compliance stuff? What could you build? And that's actually how we turn the problem on its head at Very Good Security. We've taken what we're calling the zero data approach, which is intentionally a little bit provocative to think, wait, zero data? What are you talking about? I need data. Like, I can't do anything without data. Turns out you actually can. There's a difference between using the data securely and being forced to custody it yourself, right? I own my money, but it's not shoved under my mattress at home, right? I still have access to it via my bank. I have a remote control that lets me direct the flow of those funds and exchange the value of that money, but I don't have to physically custody that in myself, right? I have a specialized entity called a bank that does that for me. And so VGS takes on that role in most cases for our customers and helps them with the secure, compliant exchange of that data. Because no one starts a business to get audited. Like, literally no one has ever said, yay, I want to deal with SOC 2 and PCI compliance, I'm going to start a company. Like, that's insane. The only exception that I know of is actually our co-founders. They did that because they're gluttons for punishment. But they actually lived this problem when building a payments company. They were embedding fintech, hint, hint, and they realized they had more than just a payments problem. They had a data problem, right? And your options really historically have been either A, lock up all of your data with a vendor like a payment processor or an issuer. Then you don't have to deal with the compliance because they mostly handle it for you, but you lose control and flexibility over your data, right? You can only do what that partner lets you do. Or the alternative, it was do it yourself. You basically build and maintain your own environment. You have complete ownership and control of your data, but you also have all of the pain and suffering of building and maintaining your compliance and security footprint. And VGS is really the Goldilocks approach. We give you full ownership and control over your data, but you also are offloading compliance and risk to us. So we, for example, completely solve for PCI compliance. This can be like upwards of 9 to 12 months of work and $1 million. We basically take that off your shoulders entirely. And we can automate things like 80% of the work for SOC 2 and a bunch more, multi-letter acronyms that no one likes to deal with. And so we give you essentially this platform with always on compliance, so you can build features instead of compliance overhead, right? And what that ends up meaning in practice for businesses is that something that was a cost center, that was an obstacle, this compliance and security thing, has actually been transformed into an opportunity. It becomes a differentiator, right? Because at this point, given all our customers in fintech, if you're not using us, chances are your competition probably is. And they're, spending less on operating costs. They're spending less on compliance and security. That doesn't mean they have a less good posture. They actually probably have a better, better than if they did it themselves, because this is all we do, right? This is our singular focus, and allows them to get to market faster. We've literally saved our customers months and years of development to get up and running in a secure, compliant way. For a fraction of the cost and time.
And I remember speaking with your CEO way back in 2019, but since then I've seen that VGS
in the before times.
Is what, sorry?
in the before times. Sorry, I didn't interrupt. 2019, what was that like?
Yeah, that was a different age. You wouldn't believe how life was back then. But I've since seen that VGS has raised a $60 million Series C fund and hit several milestones, including recognition as a Forbes Next $1 billion startup. But can you expand on all that? Because it sounds like you've had a very busy couple of years.
Yes, you could certainly say that, Neil. We have not let up over the last few years. Laurels make an uncomfortable bed, I've been told. So we try not to just focus on the accolades, but we've been very fortunate to hit some important milestones. as you mentioned. We also recently launched our payment optimization suite. We did that at Money 2020 last fall, and we've hired a number of very seasoned executives to our leadership, which has been fantastic for accelerating our growth. And we also, I think, probably doubled our headcount last year. But really, the product launches and the features that we're developing are kind of the core focus. Notably, our payment optimization suite that I mentioned. It's sort of the next iteration of VGS. We've talked about the infrastructure that we give our customers and allow them to reap the benefits of, right? That we build and maintain on their behalf. But really now our focus is on the value-added services. Back to my banking analogy, what's the compounding value of your deposit with VGS, right? How do you continually earn interest on your deposit with us and your investment in our platform? It's by value-added services that we continue to deliver. So in the case of payment optimization, it's about optimizing, giving companies full control over their payment acceptance and processing and optimization. We have a number of large global customers doing billions of dollars of transaction volume. They have multiple processors around the globe for either different coverage or redundancy or whatever is right for their business. That's really the kind of the core focus is whatever you need for your business, you should be able to do, and you should be able to find whatever partners you need or want to work with to enable those outcomes. So we're neutral, and our customers work with all manner of large and small enterprises in the fintech space, and we just help them facilitate that exchange of data. Payment optimization is a great use case. We're also doing a lot for card issuance and card account lifecycle management.
And as you said, you have launched several pivotal products there. And one that caught my eye was acceptance into the AWS ISV Accelerate program, which sounds intriguing. Is there anything else you can share around there?
Sure. Yeah, AWS is, I would say, very good security, or VGS is kind of the perfect complement to AWS in my view. AWS gives you this specialized infrastructure. You don't have to build and manage your own data center, right? No one's racking their own servers and swapping out boxes when they break. That's AWS's problem. Incredibly powerful tools, amazing platform, but you need to use that correctly, right? If I give you the keys to a Ferrari and you drive it off a cliff, that's not my fault. That's on you, right? And similarly, if your AWS or the leading cloud providers will give you servers that comply with PCI and HIPAA and SOC 2, but if you incorrectly configure your cloud stack and get hacked or something happens, that's on you. And this is where VGS comes in. We're that layer on top of your cloud stack, which is like a perfect complement to your cloud environment to help you orchestrate the secure, compliant use of that data. So, obviously I'm biased, but in my opinion, anyone building in fintech today should probably, one, use AWS or a leading cloud provider, and two, use VGS to configure it correctly and keep it secure and kind of offload all of that undifferentiated heavy lifting that you have to do, but is not a core differentiator. And then you can go about your business of adding cool features and capabilities. And so, we're very excited to be, part of the co-sell program with AWS. And also, allow people to build software and solutions that run or integrate on with AWS and VGS natively.
And before you came on the podcast, I was doing a bit of research on you guys, and one of the things that stood out as well was your belief around data security and why it's a crucial pillar for payments and e-commerce companies, especially as companies and consumers are increasingly worried about using their personal info. Is that something you can talk about as well?
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Neil. Trust really is what makes commerce work, right? Yeah. When you think about payments, e-commerce, you trust that the merchant is going to send you merchandise and fulfill their promise, charge you the amount they said they were going to charge you. You trust that they're going to keep your data safe. And if that trust erodes, commerce breaks down. And it turns out this is actually harder than it looks, right? We've gotten to a pretty good place overall in the ecosystem, but it's hard, and it's getting harder to do this correctly, especially with all the privacy rules that now complicate the environment. Your card info and your personal data goes, once it's out there, it kind of goes everywhere. It's floating around in so many different systems. I think a lot of people would be terrified if they really knew the full extent. And there are literally companies whose sole purpose is to find all of the places that your data lives within a large enterprise. Like imagine that, like they just scour different systems at an enterprise to figure out where your data has sprawled to, right? And VGS is basically the inverse of that, right? We turn the problem on its head exactly. Our view is you cannot hack or compromise what isn't there, right? If it doesn't exist, you can't be lost or can't be hacked. So back to like that zero data approach that I mentioned, we essentially let companies run all of their normal operations, right? Run your e-commerce platform, run your payments processing without actually having to have that sensitive data in your own environment. So if, God forbid, there is a compromise, there's nothing there of value at the merchant site to be compromised. And on our end, there's no context. It can't be reconstituted. We don't, it's not stored next to the merchant name or next to all your other information. So there's no honeypot or single point of failure. So, VGS helps merchants own their data, but we also help them use and exchange it securely, right? So instead of obsessing about, breach risk or compliance concerns that are always increasing, they get to do all the things they were doing before, run their business, which is the whole point, right? No one starts a business to get audited, but they can do that, their core business, whatever they're trying to do in the first place. Without all of the kind of that overhead that they have to do, but is not a differentiator for them.
And we've talked about how quickly the industry is changing and how technology is having a huge impact. But I'm curious, are there any fintech trends that particularly excite you right now?
Neil, haven't you heard? Everything is fintech. The whole world. I'm kind of only half joking, right? Because we're seeing like this bundling or embedding, and then unbundling, right? Back to the theme of like bundling and unbundling. Everything is fintech, right? So I think VGS is actually the ultimate Swiss Army knife here. You can basically embed fintech and or unbundle, like separate out the parts that you don't want and kind of have this perfect combo of the things you need and the things you want, minus the parts that are hard or costly or difficult. And you can actually, really accelerate fintech outcomes dramatically. I mean, we've seen the proof is in the pudding, right? I mean, we see this all the time. Our customers get to market much, much faster. So I think just like the convergence of fintech being baked natively into so many different things that where maybe you didn't even think it made sense before, but it's just when woven into the user experience, not just bolted on like Frankenstein style, but if you actually embed it into a really good user experience, it can be magical. I think the other thing that excites me right now, shifting gears slightly, is crypto, that whole space. And my hypothesis, a longstanding view, is crypto, DeFi, all this stuff is going to converge with, TradFi, as they call it, or traditional finance. I feel like it's inevitable. I'm also a bit of a pragmatist. I led the first investment in a crypto company when I was at Visa. And my view on this is if we want that space to succeed and really see scale adoption, it's going to have to eventually be regulated. And also we need better kind of on-ramps and off-ramps. I think it's way too hard still for most, normal people to use or access this whole entire ecosystem. And I think if we can embed those experiences into the places where that maybe they already are, into more of the traditional financial ecosystem, and give them, smoother on-ramps and off-ramps into that world, that we're going to see a much broader adoption.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. And what about yourselves at VGS? What's next for you guys? Is there anything you can share about the road ahead?
Yeah, I mean, we're growing rapidly. We really, our focus right now is on making it as easy as possible for companies to, embed fintech and launch payment capabilities, especially around payment optimization. That's definitely a core focus for us. Card issuing with the full kind of card account lifecycle management, network tokens, provisioning, all of those things that are the unsexy parts that have to go right for this to work seamlessly. That's really our focus, is on enabling that at scale, helping our customers launch new features and differentiators, while we take care of kind of the the unfun, unsexy stuff behind the scenes, but that's the stuff that really can, catapult you forward in terms of go to market. So that's really executing in that space is really our core focus for the next months and coming months, I guess.
Fantastic. And we began the podcast talking about your origin story. So as we come full circle, I want to ask if there was a song, movie or book or anything that has inspired or helped you in your career, and ask you to share your choice and a story behind it, and maybe leave the listeners on an inspirational note today.
I love this question. I was originally going to say Take 5 by Dave Brubeck, but I checked out your Spotify playlist, which is amazing, by the way. And I saw it was already in there. So someone stole my answer, but it's a really cool song. Not only does it sound great, but if you know nothing about jazz, you can still enjoy it, but it's actually layers to it because it's an uncommon time signature, which to me is like an analogy to kind of technological innovation. When it came out, actually all the music execs hated it. They're like, this is a dud. No one gets this. Like, what is weird, 5/4 or 9/8 time signatures no one had ever heard of. But then like people loved it. It got played on the radio and people were like, this is amazing. Now it's like, now it's legendary. So since I can't that's not an original answer, unfortunately, but it's one of my favorites. I'll give you another one. And it's Don't Let Nobody Rob You of Your Joy by a guy named Paul Thorne. I have 2 daughters and they are just sunshine personified. I mean, they just absolutely radiate life and happiness and like sheer unbridled joy. And I sincerely hope with all my heart that they never lose that. And so I love that song. It's kind of a catchy tune, but it also, they're too young to understand right now, but it's something that I hope that they absorb as they get older. We can't necessarily control other people, but we can certainly control our reactions to others and not let ourselves be defined by what other people do or think. Simple advice, I guess, but not so easy to practice, even for myself. And so I love that song as a reminder. And plus, it's just kind of a catchy tune.
Awesome. I've not heard that one. I'm going to check that one out as I add that in the next 10 minutes or so. But before I let you go, can you just remind the listeners of where they can find you online and equally contact your team if they've got any questions?
Absolutely. You can find me most often on Twitter. I'm at Peter, just Peter on Twitter. I was there fairly early. And if you have any questions about VGS, you can also drop me or us a line. I'm Peter at verygoodsecurity.com, or you can also write to info@verygoodsecurity.com.
Well, I love chatting with you today. We've covered so much in a short amount of time there, from major industry trends and the rise of virtual cards and embedded fintech and your story. But more than anything, I think it was your story that brought everything to life, and leaving us with a good tune as well. So thank you so much for sharing that with me today.
Neil, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your time. It was a great conversation.
You guessed it, Peter Berg has officially been added to my cool guys I want to share a beer list. And speaking of which, my first trip to the US in a long time after my Dynatrace trip in Vegas got cancelled in February is now going to be Utah in March. I'm going to be speaking about imposter syndrome at Sarah Elkin's No Longer Virtual event, where she connects with people beyond the keyboard. So if you'd like to grab a beer with me at that event, or you want more details, or during my downtime, if you'd like to take me to Skinwalker Ranch, gaze up at the stars, looking for UFOs while drinking a beer, whatever it is, let me know. Email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn at Neil C. Hughes, and my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. But it's time for me to go now. I've got to prepare for another guest I'm going to record and get out to you tomorrow. So thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.